It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, folks, welcome in. The Buffalo Bills have a lot of injuries. We learned about that yesterday through Sean McDermott. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mitch Trubisky, Quentin Morris going to be out for multiple weeks. Curtis Samuel with the turf toe. He's going to be week to week, in addition to DeMar Hamlin with a hamstring. A lot of injuries, and they just continue to compound. And so Sean McDermott shared on Monday that the starters will not play at all in the preseason game this coming week against the Carolina Panthers. He did admit that it was his plan to play most of them, but given the health of the team, he's decided to pivot away from that. And so the Bills are in a bit of a spot here trying to get healthy. They also signed quarterback Anthony Brown, who was an undrafted free agent out of Oregon, spent the last couple of years with the Ravens practice squad. And he'll be part of the mix to get the Bills through Saturday against Carolina, along with Ben DiNucci at quarterback, as Trubisky won't be available and Josh Allen won't play. And so, of course, the team has to get ready for week one against the Cardinals and a very quick turnaround, week two against the Dolphins on the road. So they need to blend getting ready with getting healthy. And so a big task ahead for Sean McDermott and company. But the objective today is herd mentality. We have some great questions, and I want to get into them. And the first one kind of leans into the lack of playing time for Josh Allen in the preseason. This one comes from John, who says, can we agree, or can we all agree at this point in the preseason, the most uncomfortable aspect of the team is the passing offense? This was the elephant in the room for the offseason with the receiver room changeover, and now we are here with one preseason game left, and all our new faces have had nothing but Trubisky, Buechele, and DiNucci working with them in a game setting. Yes, practice is obviously where they are growing with Josh, but these guys need the games to make plays and earn their place at the table. For the receivers, it's so hard to do that in Trubisky's offense under the lights. If I was MVS or Keon Coleman, I would have been extremely frustrated. Do you think Joe Brady is a bit mad at McDermott for the decision to sit Josh in Pittsburgh? Shout out to the D and Buffalo Joe. All right, so a lot to get into here, and you acknowledged a critical piece of this. Of course, practice is where the chemistry is happening, and of course, I think the blue-red at the stadium was probably pretty helpful in simulating some of that live game scenarios. And I would also say that I am a big believer in the best way to get ready to play football is to play football. So I think there is value in preseason reps, and every team does it differently, right? I mean, Andy Reid plays his starters a bunch in the preseason. You have other teams that don't play them at all. The Bills are going to face a team in the Arizona Cardinals in week one that will have zero playing time for their starters during the preseason. Carolina Panthers, new coaching staff, right? Brand new coaching staff, tons of new players. They're not playing their guys in preseason. So the decisions are all across the board for teams, whether they're healthy or not, right? Every team has a different approach, but I do think there's value in preseason reps. And I do think that because of how this has unfolded, the team will have to do the best they can to simulate live game situations in practice to get the team ready. But one thing that I came across on Monday on X was from Ryan O'Halloran, who covers the Bills for the Buffalo News. He put out a tweet on X about Josh Allen and preseason snaps and passing attempts. And so I thought this was pretty enlightening. So Josh Allen, let's just go with passing attempts. Josh Allen passing attempts for his career, 2018, 45 in preseason. 2019, 28 in preseason. 2020, there was no preseason. Well, that's cool because that was Josh Allen's best season. Didn't have any preseason at all. 2021, 26 passing attempts. 2022, 3 passing attempts. I'd say that 2022 might have been Josh Allen's second best season. 2023, 17 passing attempts, and then 2024 is going to be 3 passing attempts. So it doesn't look like Josh Allen that necessarily needs the preseason. And throughout those years, you've seen like the 1 year with no preseason, you incorporate Stephon Diggs. You've seen a coordinator change, right? Of course, with Dayball to Dorsey happening amid there. So I think it would be ideal if he did have, a decent amount of passing attempts and you saw some success throwing the ball to some of these new targets in those moments, but that's just not the world that the Bills live in. And I think given the wide range of perspectives in terms of how teams attack this and Josh Allen's status in the league with a coordinator and Joe Brady, that while it's his first year, it's not an unfamiliar name. And we'll have to see how it goes. I think they would have benefited from it, but I don't think this is a doomsday scenario that this hasn't happened. I guess if your biggest concern is Josh Allen executing the passing offense, all right, we'll take it. Next one is from Derek, and these next couple of questions are about Joe Andreessen. So Derek from Rochester says, did Buffalo Joe show you things that seem like traits and tendencies that were true and sustainable? Or was he a flash in the pan and a one-hit wonder? Don't get me wrong, I love the story for him, but I'm fearful of a Linsanity moment here, or insert any other similar NFL tale here, which we all know. I'd love to see him continue to grow and develop and integrate into our system, but I have a tough time subscribing that after just one night. What are your thoughts? It's a good question from Derek, and I think contextualizing Joe Andreessen's performance against the Steelers is important. He played exceptionally well. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, it's one preseason exposure, and there's still plenty to learn about Joe Andreessen. Now, I think what we can come away with is that he has earned more opportunity, and we'll see how it goes. But I think what he showcased in the game is extremely translatable. I mean, making tackles in space against dynamic athletes like Justin Fields and Cordero Patterson, putting good starting NFL guards in James Daniels and Isaac Seumalo back in the hole, being able to stack shed and displace those blocks, carrying Pat Freiermuth, a good starting NFL tight end, in man coverage down the field on a vertical route. Joe Andreessen's a heck of an athlete, a high nines and the RAS, and has good size. So he's got size, athleticism, and did things against NFL starters, and that gives me a lot of hope that it does translate. It's just about expanding the sample size to tell us who you are as a player. And I think the other thing that's important to acknowledge about Joe Andreessen is he played Mike linebacker in the game. That's not a bad thing. It's just not the will linebacker, which is where Matt Milano plays. Terrel Bernard's the Mike linebacker. And so we've seen the Bills kind of be cautious recently about cross-training linebackers. Brandon Beane was pretty open about Terrel Bernard, and they started off his rookie season. He learned both spots, and when he had to play against the Jets and it wasn't his best football, it sounds like Bernard and Beane had a pretty honest conversation about, the challenges of learning both spots and how maybe that didn't set himself up well to play in that spot. And then you saw Dorian Williams last year, the Bills start him at one position, switch him to the other, and then moved him back full-time to a different spot. So I think the Bills want to be careful about not overloading these linebackers, and I'm sure that extends to Joe Andreessen, who was a tryout player that turned into a UDFA. So I think there's plenty to like. We want to see the sample size grow, and I do think there's a lot of translatability. I think complete translatability in what he did against Pittsburgh. Cole says, what's the path for a guy like Joe Andreessen to make the roster? If the Bills usually roster somewhere between 4 and 6 linebackers, does he have a legitimate shot? With Bernard and Williams as the starters, with Jones, Spector, and Moreau competing, assuming those last two get healthy, can he beat one of them out? But the Bills roster, will the Bills roster 6 last year and already seeing injuries stack up at the position? All right, so Cole, I do think the number for the Bills at linebacker is 6. Every year under Sean McDermott, the initial 53 had 6 linebackers. Now, last year, Balin Spector was part of that mix, and then he was placed on injured reserve the day after cuts, and then the team signed Jermaine Ifedi. But they've started every single year with 6 linebackers. And so I think that's the number this year, especially when, you've already got the Milano injury and you saw what happened last year with linebacker depth. So I think 6 is the number. I think Terrel Bernard and Dorian Williams are absolute locks. So that means you have 4 spots left. And in the mix for those 4 spots, Deion Jones, Joe Andreessen, Nicholas Morrow, Balin Spector, Edifwan Ulofoccio, and Shane Simon. So you got 6 players for 4 spots. With all due respect to Shane Simon, I think you can eliminate him from the mix. That gets you down to have 5 players for 4 spots. So whether that's putting a player on IR, and I think there's candidates in Morrow, Spector, and Ulofoccio as guys that, I think especially in the case of Ulofoccio, if you're the Bills, you probably love to stash him for a year like you've done with other players that during the rookie seasons, and that would create the path. I think there's a case to be made that maybe he deserves the spot over Balin Spector, who continues to have availability concerns. So I think that there is a path. I don't think the Bills are interested in, not being able to keep him around, especially if he, replicates what he did against Pittsburgh this week against Carolina, where we know he's going to get a ton of opportunity. So, yeah, I think there's absolutely a path to the 53-man roster for Joe Andreessen. And I think what's most exciting about that in particular this year is the athleticism, the ability to get off blocks, the tackling. That's going to be so big for the kickoff coverage units. And so I think there's a really clear path for Joe Andreessen, and I think I can speak for everyone in that we're all rooting for him. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, welcome back. Next one here comes from Drew. And Drew says, hey, Joe, I've got a herd mentality question about team building. It seems like the Bills often go in a slightly different direction than expected when filling positions. When we thought they needed an Edmonds replacement, they instead went for two matchup linebackers. When we thought they needed an X receiver, they instead drafted Coleman, who many people describe as a big slot. When we thought they needed to replace Poyer and Hyde, they instead brought in several guys like Poyer and not many like Hyde, even with Justin Simmons, who seems to be the most natural free safety being available. Do you agree the Bills often build their roster a little different than normal? If so, do you think they do so out of necessity, or do they want a different mix of players than most teams? I think it's a good question, and I think you call out some meaningful stuff. But I think what it comes down to is the team just adjusting as league trends happen, getting ahead of league trends. McDermott and Beane talk a lot about zigging while others are zagging. And I think that the Bills are very much a forward-thinking operation. And I know that some people don't believe that. I don't know why. There's no evidence that supports it. Some people think that Sean McDermott's just a dusty coach, but I mean, come on. There's absolutely no proof of that. And I think the evolution of how he's crafted this team along with Brandon Beane really speaks to that. And so I think it's interesting that you call out 3 positions in wide receiver, linebacker, and safety. And so at wide receiver, you've seen them go more towards size at the position. At linebacker, you've seen more speed and matchup ability. And at safety, you see more size and downhill ability. And I think all that goes hand in hand with how the league is trending. You know, you're thinking about offenses using bigger personnel, playing more tight ends, more running backs. Well, matchups, linebackers, and size at safety and guys that can play downhill and tackle helps combat that. When it comes to size at wide receiver, you've seen teams that are accustomed to playing smaller defensive personnel groupings, and now you kind of match that with size and you create matchup problems. And so I think the Bills are trying to build a roster that creates matchup problems for opponents, and evolving at those spots is part of it. So I think the Bills should have a different approach to things today than they did 5 years ago or 6 or 7 years ago. And I think these decisions speak to that. Justin says, what's the one thing that has surprised you the most this training camp / preseason? What's the one thing that's disappointed you the most? What's the biggest thing you believe remains undecided? All right, so the biggest surprise to me is definitely Daequan Hardy at outside cornerback. 5'10", 180-pound slot corner at Penn State, playing outside corner. Not something I had on my bingo card. I thought that Hardy would provide depth in the slot, be a punt returner, kind of be a man coverage type player. This guy looks awesome at outside corner playing zone. I mean, really different jobs. And he's playing the run extremely well. I think it's him. That's been my biggest surprise. My biggest disappointment outside of injuries, because I think that's the low-hanging fruit, it's probably Tyler Bass. And look, I know Tyler Bass has been perfect in the preseason game. So what is he, 5 for 5 to this point? But I don't know. The guy goes 4 for 6 every time we get an update from training camp practices. And I just wanted to feel better about him. And maybe I should care a lot more about what happens in games, and that confidence will be restored as the sample size of him making kicks goes up. But I don't like the way that I feel about Tyler Bass right now. I wish that was different. So that makes me disappointed. And then the thing that's most undecided, I think it's probably the safety spot opposite of Taylor Rapp, because they're all hurt, right? I mean, Damar Hamlin week to week with a hamstring. Cole Bishop's been out with a shoulder. Mike Edwards has been out with a hamstring. Like, is it going to be Cam Lewis? Is it going to be Kareem Jackson? Who knows? You know, these guys obviously have a little time to get healthy, but I feel like that's just a very unsettled spot on this roster. I think maybe offensive lineman 10 is a fun conversation. I think it might be a Will Clapp versus Lyle Collins conversation for that spot. And then that wide receiver 5 and 6 spot is also a position that I think is pretty unsettled right now. So a lot to work through, but that was a fun question from Justin. Matthew says, I was curious if you had thoughts on what position group could surprise the most this season. It seems each year we have questions surrounding a specific position group that ends up being just fine. I think the spot for me is defensive tackle. I think everybody knows how good Ed Oliver is, and I think he'll replicate, if not build upon, what he did last year. But don't forget about that Daequan Jones guy. He's a heck of a football player, and he plays extremely well with Ed. But it's the depth here that really excites me. I really like Austin Johnson. I think his ability to be a backup nose for Daequan Jones is really different than what the Bills have had, kind of leaning into Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips. I think Johnson's just such a more firm player that can defend the run so much better, and I think that's going to help not only Daequan Jones be more fresh, but what it's going to mean for the second level of this defense to be able to play more free and not have to deal with as much contact. So I'm excited for Austin Johnson. Dewayne Carter is a rookie. I think he's shown me a lot as a run defender, and that's where I had questions, but I think he's been really good this preseason as a run defender, and I think the pass rush piece will come with that. And I think that's probably your rostered players, but then you're looking at a situation where you could have Elianku and Deshaun Williams back on your practice squad potentially. I mean, that's very, very good depth, a lot of versatility in terms of skill sets available, and I'm just really comfortable with it. So I think that those guys are gonna have one heck of a year. Joseph says, do you think all the different new wide receivers being added suddenly is a red flag for what the wide receiver 5 spot looks like right now? Obviously, Samuel, Shakir, Coleman, and Hollins are all a lock, but it seems the 5th guy is wide open, even with all the talent they've had since the draft. So I've talked myself into a lot of different things on this. On one hand, is it as simple as the Bills signed Deion Kane, Damiere Byrd, looked at Corey Davis, who has since committed to staying retired? Have they made these moves because they're not satisfied with their options at wide receiver 5 or 6? Or is it as simple as this? Guys got hurt, right? Claypool got hurt. Lawrence Keys got hurt, and they needed to bring back some bodies to get the numbers back where they want them. So I think it might be just a simple explanation as that. But I think there's also a case to be made that those last 2 spots are unsettled, and they're just trying as many different things as possible, whether it's Andy Isabella or KJ Hamler or Tyrell Shavers or bringing in Damiere Byrd or whatever different plans. Plus, Brian Thompson got hurt as well. That's a third guy that I was trying to think of there. So I think they're trying options, seeing what sticks. And I think one thing that might be a little bit lost in this wide receiver competition is that I think MVS probably makes this roster just based on the way that his contract is. But I think that MVS has a chance to be this year's Poona Ford, where it's like a veteran player that can do some things for you, has limitations, but ultimately doesn't play. And if MVS is wide receiver 5, which I think we can all acknowledge. I mean, everybody says there's 4 locks, Shakir, Coleman, Samuel, and Hollins. So that means MVS at best is wide receiver 5. If you're the wide receiver 5 and you don't play special teams, it's going to be hard to get a jersey on game days. I mean, what value is he going to? He's a vertical threat. He doesn't play special teams. Your depth receivers have to play special teams. So I think that kind of gets in the way of MVS getting a jersey, even if he was healthy. So I think he could be this year's Poona Ford, who was mostly inactive last year. Now, maybe that changes as the season goes along. You never know what happens with injuries, but also maybe you want to add that layer into your offense later on. It's kind of been a slow burn with his onboarding process, it feels like, and certainly this injury is not going to help, but I feel like that could be the trajectory there. So with that in mind, I think it's just, hey, trying out options, seeing what sticks, and seeing what the right mix is to be the last couple rostered receivers for the Bills this year. All right, folks, we got some more to get to on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me. The NFL season is here. I know you want to get to some of these games. Well, if you do, you got to download the Game Time app. Game Time is the fast and easy way to purchase tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They've got some awesome features in the app, which is really easy to navigate. They give you last-minute ticket specials. They give you flash deals, a seat view, so you know exactly what to expect when you get to the venue. But my favorite thing is you can choose to turn on all-in prices, so you can see the full price from the beginning of the purchase as opposed to getting surprised with processing fees at the end. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, welcome back. The next one today comes from Alex. Alex says, I know a lot of people are criticizing Mitch Trubisky's performance in preseason so far, but is it possible that the pass-catching talent just isn't very good and any backup quarterback would look just as bad? Fair question, but I think with Mitch Trubisky, his time in Pittsburgh, where he prepared to start and worked with starters and how he played there, kind of validates that this is who he is. And my concern with Trubisky is his overall trajectory as a player, like his overall arc as a player and where he's at. You know, number 2 pick in the draft, has some level of success, spotty play, but some level of success with the Bears. But it really just kind of tanked out towards the end. They move on. You know, the only thing he can do is go to Buffalo and be a backup. Gets another opportunity in Pittsburgh, and he stinks out loud, and now he's back in Buffalo, where I feel like Trubisky probably is a bit of a, like, just damaged goods mentally, where you could tell he's not confident in what he sees. He's not confident in pulling the trigger and ripping throws. And you can't play with that level of hesitation and be a good player in the NFL. You have to be confident, and I don't think he has any confidence. I think he's a player that's looking to play good ball, but not playing free enough to do that. Not relying on the skill set that made him the number 2 pick in the draft. And so I think he could be damaged goods right now. I'm not optimistic with him. You know, you hear some guys like Geno Smith is a guy that I think a lot about, and he's been very successful with his opportunity in Seattle, all things considered. And of course, he had the famous moment. It was a Monday night game or something. Goes out and balls out after the game. He does an interview and he says, you know, everybody wrote me off, but I didn't write back. And you talk about guys that, hey, look, I got my opportunity. It didn't work out. I waited a long time to get my opportunity again, and I wasn't going to leave anything on the table. I don't feel like Trubisky has that mindset. I think Trubisky has the mindset of, don't make mistakes. Well, at some point, you got to look at yourself and say, hey, man, I got nothing to lose. I got to prove myself. I'm down, and I got to go out and play and ball. And I just don't feel like Trubisky's got that mindset. And I think that's the guys that are able to kind of rehab their careers. That's what happens. But then there's also, for every Geno Smith, there's a Carson Wentz situation. There's a Mitch Trubisky situation. And, there's a lot of concern that I have about Trubisky and whether or not he can be a reasonable player in the NFL anymore. Matthew said, you said in the last podcast, being able to make space is the most important, even in the red zone, for a wide receiver. So my question is, who on this roster is best at making space? That's a good question. And so just to kind of give a little bit more context, I was talking about red zone wide receivers and this myth that size is what matters in the red zone. Everyone says, a 6'2 plus, 200 pounds plus, long arms, 40-inch vertical. That's what you need in the red zone. Which is funny because simultaneously, everybody's least favorite play in the red zone is fade balls. The most important thing for a wide receiver, in my opinion, is to create space. Can you get open and present an available target? And in a tighter, restricted area of the field like the red zone, that ability to create space is even more important. And so I think the best red zone receivers are the ones that can create quick separation. So the question from Matthew is, who can do that on the Bills? The players that I feel like have the best ability to create that space, Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel. I think those two guys are the best quick separators that this team has to offer. Now, it's nice to be able to have catch radius and ball skills and body control. And, Josh Allen can kind of just put it in a spot and trust that a guy can go make a play. But as you know, like those are just low percentage plays. You know what's high percentage? Being able to uncover quickly and be open and catch the ball without a contested situation. That's what I like. And I think Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel are the best players on this roster to do that. The next one here comes from Brett, who says, please consider explaining how game day headset communication works. I see all the guys with headsets, but who talks to who and who can hear who? Does the green dot player only hear one person? How much debate and collaboration happens on the headset between coaches? So in terms of on the field, only one player on the field at a time can have the green dot on their helmet. And that's a one-way communication from the play caller to the player. And that communication cuts off when the play clock hits 15 seconds or the ball is snapped, whichever thing happens first. So the coach, the play caller, is in the ear of whoever it is, the linebacker that has it, Josh Allen. They can talk up to 15 seconds left in the play clock or the ball is snapped, and it is one-way communication. And then from the coach's perspective, each coach has a designated channel that enables them to communicate with specific personnel. So if Joe Brady wants to talk to just Aaron Cromer, he can do that. Or if guys want to listen in on the calls or whatever, they can choose to be part of that specific channel. As far as the debate and collaboration, I think most of that happens during the week. The staffs are involved in developing the play sheet, what they want to run, what they think the game script is going to look like. And so they come up with that menu, if you will, during the week. And then the play caller makes the on-the-fly decisions. Then from a game management perspective, that's where Sean McDermott with his support staff, which would be was it Mark Warshwick or these other guys? He's got like a game day management coach, Mark Lubbock, I think, John Perry. Those guys are going to be part of the game day management decisions. And so I don't think Rob Boris, the tight ends coach, is saying anything to Sean McDermott about decisions that need to happen with game management. So hopefully that provided the insight you were looking for on the headsets and the green dot. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on this episode. I certainly appreciate you being here. Have some fun stuff lined up for the rest of the week. We have a couple of guests that I'm excited to get to. I want to bring some outside perspective in on some of the season outlook stuff, but also one of those guests is a former player on the Bills. And so I want to get very specific with some of the situations that are happening right now with the team through the lens of a player. So that should be fun. And of course, the Bills playing the Panthers. There's injuries. there's a lot to get through as the Bills get ready for the season. So make sure that you keep it locked in right here on Locked On Bills. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.